Good afternoon. I'm Makesha Jackson. This is my video presentation for Government 307, Introduction into Political Theory. This is for Dr. Janet Hunter. And I decided to go with Lenin for my presentation. As you can see, I found lemonade at a private pizza shop in North Phoenix. That's pretty cool. A bunch of his books, history book on Lenin, and another one on the Russian Revolution. And my fiance for being Eastern European and how much I study communism and other government aspects. I have some communist pins, maybe be blurry on the photo, but let's begin. So Vladimir Lenin was born on April 22nd, 1870, but he didn't gain his revolutionary name until 1901, which was Lenin. His birth name is Vladimir Ilyich Ulanov. His father was Ilya Nikolaevich Ulanov, and his mother was Maria Alexandrovna Blanc. Both middle-class family. They lived in a upper bourgeoisie, what they would classify how he lived. He had siblings. I think he was, let's see here, 2 out of 6. His family really focused on education at a younger age. He was a bright, intelligent young boy growing up, where he was born in Simbirsk, Russia, and his father, actually, Ilya Nikolaevich, was the director of the public schools in Simbirsk, Russia, where Lenin was raised, majority of his childhood and teenage years going to the university. He started the university at the University of Kazan, or Kazan, don't know how it's going to be pronounced, to pursue law for his degree, but he was expelled for associating with an illegal student group of mass demonstrations across campus. The authorities did not like him, and he also had a reputation because of his brother, his brother was executed. His brother was Alexander Ulanov, and he was associated with a terrorist organization called the People's Will. And to this day, a lot of scholars believe that could be most of the reason how you would consider Lenin being radical leading into his communist development. But when he was expelled from the University of Kazan, he went back to his small country estate over there in Simbirsk, Russia, next to the Volga River. And that's when he got introduced to the works of Karl Marx. And by the 1890s, he was dedicated to Marxism, studying all the works, volume 1 of Capitalism by Marx. But he also continued to study law privately. In 1891, the Russian authorities, the Tsar government, allowed him to take his bar exam, and he was passing school in college with high grades, intelligent. He knew how to speak Greek, Latin. And by 1893, the St. Petersburg Authority passed him for his bar exam. And after that, that's when he began to push his Marxist propaganda throughout the city. And we could consider that the beginning of the socialist movement in the 1890s, leading up into the 20th century with Lenin getting where he's getting. So his education, his parents coming from noble status, they were a democratic family. They believed in human rights. They hammered education at an early age. But they didn't lose their noble status, but life got harder when his father passed away. But when he was living on this farm after his father passed away, he noticed that there was no industry jobs for everyone. People were working for property owners on farms. During this time, Russia had no industry. It was all agriculture. And the working class, the peasants, they all worked on private land owned by the Tsar government or nobles of the Tsar government and aristocrats. And that hit home to Lenin. He did not like that, even though he came from a noble childhood. But after his father died and his brother being executed for some radical views of the people's will, that psychologically somehow changed Lenin into the man he was becoming after his law degree and studying Marxism. So, you look at his education, college educated, his parents teaching him at an early age with geography. They had bookcases all over his house of different works of different philosophers. The geographic area of Russia, the agriculture, the Tsar government with aristocracies. So that all played a shape into the locations and the time he lived in. And there was just, the economy wasn't working. They wanted a living wage, jobs for everyone to be equal. Then that leads into the examples that contributed to his view on communism. And he studied a lot, and he was guided with the help of a Russian Marxist, a philosopher, Georgi Planktonov. He studied heavily into an extensive study with Marx and Engels with their available work, which I said earlier, the Capital Volume 1, Communist Manifesto, Germany, Ideology and Economic Philosophy manuscripts of 1844. And these were important works for his study to form his historical developments to lead the Russian Revolution, starting from, you can see the early ages of it in the 1890s, but the first revolution recorded to that, like an actual revolution, was in 1905. But he was actually exiled in 1901 because of the organization he was doing in the late 90s, early 1900s, that exiled him to Siberia. And that's where he started writing his own books and pushing out his pamphlets and propaganda to start organizing the vanguards to get everyone together to stage the revolutions. And he didn't like the Tsar government, There was the class conflicts, the divisions, the differences of all the different classes with the poor class, the noble status, and the kings and the royals. They were also the stake for political struggle. And, Lenin did not like any of that, and it just kept adding on and adding on the further we got along in the early 20th century. But I think it's important to note, when he was exiled, what was going through his head and what he was writing about, and how he was writing these pamphlets to organize the people, to tell them how we have to do this, what has to be done for the Soviet Union to coexist and be a working class dictatorship for the better of our people and the nation of Russia. And another major aspect of the contribution of Lenin's concepts of communism, the Eastern Front of World War I was devastating to the Tsar government and the Russians at that time. Since there was no industry and production, they couldn't keep up producing what they needed to support the troops in World War I. The economy was broken. The Tsar government couldn't contain anything with all the riots and protests going on and what Lenin and the vanguards were leading, the Bolsheviks. The political struggle of people falling apart, and World War I really set that straight with Lenin, because of there was just madness going on. There was people just dying, being pushed out there, couldn't keep up with the mandate and the manpower. There was no leadership for World War One for these guys, and Lenin just wasn't having it, and they just kept going forward with their communist ideology and to push this revolution to take control as the Soviet Union. And you look at his education, you go back to his childhood, what he was learning, the different languages he was learning, different cultures and the books he was reading, his parents being very democratic and human rights for freedom, his dad passing away, then his brother being executed by the Tsar government for being a terrorist and part of these radical groups protesting against the Tsar. Then you look at the college, getting his law degree and writing his pamphlets, being exiled from his own government. There was no opportunity for jobs in their sake. It was just for him, it was just the Tsar government and the nobles were getting more money, and the people and the peasants, the working class, they were getting nothing. They were being forget. So you see all that. I mean, the education, that World War One, being exiled, the locations he was living in, at a farm when he was a kid and a teenager, studying, doing his works, and he gets exiled because of his work and what he was doing. The locations, the times he was living in of World War One, no economic promises. It all adds into the main lead up to the 1917 revolution, who Lenin was destined to be with the work he was pushing and what he was trying to achieve. Lastly, Lenin's concepts of communism, do they have a place in modern American society? They do not. As we know, the Palmer raids in the early 20th century took care of a lot of that, what was going on. Then you had the McCarthy era, then the Cold War era, and we have today's generation. The communism that Lenin was pushing in the Soviet Union was disruptive. It was violent. People were hung, killed. Homes were raided of nobles. It was violent. As I already said, it wasn't peaceful. Their goal was to achieve power for the Soviets, and they were going to do anything it took. And that, it executed the king, it executed the king's son. People were thrown in gulags as soon as they were opened, or just kicked out of the country, or they were persecuted. That concept of communism, then the one centralized government controlling everything to equal it out to the entire society, would not work in America, and the concept cannot work. In order for it to work, there's going to have to be a violent uprising, continuous communist revolution type to push that in America, which, not saying it's not possible, it's absolutely possible. But it would have to be consistent and harsher than what Lenin had to do, because in America, we have a lot of liberty-minded people that have been taught that we don't want communism, we don't like that ideology, we don't like what it stands for and what it takes to get there. People are going to retaliate against that, and they're going to defend their life, property, and pursuit of happiness. It would lead into a devastating bloodbath that we do not need to see in this country, which we have seen bloodbaths, you're going back to the 1864 Civil War, or even in the first American Revolution, in the War of 1812. The Americans don't want war, and there's ways to prevent that from education. Well, I think actually, education is the biggest one. What can we learn from communism? What have we been taught about it? What have we been lied about it? Or what have we been told the truth about it? But you have to respect Lenin. I think a lot of people discredit the man. For the time he was living in and what was going around in his life, from his early childhood, being pointed out and discriminated against in his own university, then being persecuted and exiled from his own country, then the lead up to World War I that was devastating to the Russian people, the Tsar government, and just the way he was continuously pushing forward until he got to his 1917 revolution, achieved that, had the Civil War that happened right after the Russian Revolution, took care of that, and after all said and done, he passed away in January 21st, 1924, in Gorky, Soviet Union. And actually, it talks about it in the Lenin book here, his biography. He was in multiple assassination attacks, and he survived each one. So you look at that, and people were trying to take him out. They didn't like his ideas, and they saw what they were doing, and he survived each one. And he just had a stroke and passed away. Then that's when, Stalin came along. But that's pretty much just a quick history of Vladimir Lenin. His early life, his education, how his parents were, how his parents thought, what shaped his ideas, his locations where he was at, the times he lived in, the contributions of his concepts of communism, and whether the chosen person's concept of communism have a place in modern America, which I do not believe they do. But I hope this presentation was clarifying for you and that you enjoyed it, and I thank you for a great semester, Professor.